Hello, comrades, and welcome back to Ushanka Show. I'm your host, Sergei Sputnikov, and I was born in the USSR back in 1971. As the war in Ukraine approaches 3 months mark, I'm still trying to understand what's going on in the minds of Russian people, and that's why I follow a lot of Telegram channels which are pro-Putin, pro-war, and trying just to see what is happening there. And recently I stumbled on this quite interesting, I guess you can call it article, comparing Putin with Stalin. And I need to remind you that some time ago Putin called Stalin an effective manager. Alright, so here we go, comparing Putin and Stalin. So I will read you the translation of this article and I will add some of my comments. And then of course I would love to read your comment. Alright, today hardly anyone would argue with the fact that in Ukraine Russia is currently facing the similar situation as the Soviet Union had faced in the 30s and 40s of the last century. Anglo-Saxons, first of all the Great Britain, from the early 2000s actively have been preparing Ukraine to be a Nazi icebreaker too. The first Nazi icebreaker was aimed at the Soviet Union. So here we have a quite interesting reference to the book by Viktor Suvorov, The Icebreaker, which was published in the Soviet Union in the late 80s during the Perestroika times. And that book gave interesting explanation why Soviet Union didn't do so well in the beginning of war with Germany. And the main thesis of that book that Stalin actually helped a lot Hitler to become what he became, to become the icebreaker that would crush the Western Europe, and then the Red Army would march into the smoldering ruins and take over the whole Western Europe. And it worked for a while. If you remember, Hitler attacked Poland together with Stalin. They peacefully took apart Poland. Then Hitler went after France and other territories while Stalin was working on Baltic states and had the war with Finland. But in this article, although it's a similar reference to the Nazi icebreaker, so Nazi Germany being icebreaker, but it was created by Anglo-Saxons in order to destroy the Soviet Union. So Hitler was created not by Stalin, but by Anglo-Saxons with a different purpose. So Nazi icebreaker version 1.0 was Nazi Germany, and Nazi icebreaker 2.0 was Ukraine, which Putin and his buddies call neo-Nazi. Okay, so back to the article. They've been actively pumping with money and ideology, worked with Ukrainian military, secret service and government. In 8 years, they created a monster which was ready to invade Russia. So quite interesting. They claim that Ukraine was getting ready to invade Russia. We need to admit that Anglo-Saxons are well rehearsed in the humanitarian colonial technologies. I have no idea what they talk about here. Humanitarian colonial technologies that allow to perform a collective reprogramming. The Russian word is used, перепрошивка, so like you have a cell phone and you can change the firmware. So there's reprogramming of public consciousness in a relatively short time by historical measurements. That's what they, Anglo-Saxons, means pretty much managed to achieve in Ukraine. After the coup of 2014 and removal of legitimate President Viktor Yanukovych from power, and here I need to make a separate video about Viktor Yanukovych, but he was obviously Putin's puppet. On the second try, Putin managed to make him a president of Ukraine. That guy actually went to prison twice. So technically, he shouldn't be allowed to be even, elected or participate in election. But they somehow clean his papers, and so he didn't have it on his record. He was in prison. And so he was removed from power. And in the course of following 8 years, Ukraine had become a state with openly Nazist and fascist ideology. It appears that Putin had some big plans in regards to Viktor Yanukovych. He probably spent a lot of money making him a president of Ukraine, and he got extremely upset when Yanukovych got removed. I betcha he was planning to create the great Russia with Ukraine and Belarus. He has Lukashenko in his pocket forever, and Yanukovych was his puppet. And when it failed, that's what he got super upset. And while during these 8 years, so they're talking 8 years between 2014 when Yanukovych was removed till 2022, so Ukraine during this time managed to hide the fact that it became a state with openly Nazis and fascist ideology. After the beginning of the special military operation, remember in Russia it's illegal to call this war. You only can call it special military operation, специальная военная операция. So after the beginning of that special military operation, the bare teeth of the Nazi modern Ukraine became visible to all independent observers. Not sure which independent observers they're talking about. There is only one difference between the events of 1941 and the current events of 2022. In 1941, we, as Soviet Union, weren't capable to kill the Nazi beast in its lair by attacking first. It happened because, number one, we didn't complete the 10-year economic jump that Stalin was talking about back in 1932. We were shy of a year or two to be ready, first of all in the area of rearmament. And this is kind of interesting statement because in 1941, the Red Army had more tanks than the rest of the world combined. And quite a few of those tanks were like T-34, KV-1, and KV-2. No one else had tanks even close. So besides having the biggest army in the world with the most amount of tanks than the rest of the world, they claimed that still we weren't ready. We needed another year or two for rearmament. They already were like armed to the teeth in 1941. Number two, geopolitically, we were weaker than today. So that's an interesting statement. So they think, this author thinks that in 1941, the Soviet Union was weaker geopolitically than Russia in 2022, which I don't think so. Because especially if you remember, back then Stalin had a communist parties quite strong and supporting Stalin policy in pretty much every Western country. Do you know anything about Communist Party of Germany right now, or France, or Great Britain, or United States, Spain? I'm not sure if those even exist, or if they exist, they're pretty quite minor. But back in 1941 and 40s, communist parties were quite strong. Alright, so Stalin was geopolitically weaker, and he wasn't ready to face a joint coalition of Germany, Britain, France, USA, Japan, and other countries. This is like the most insane statement so far. So Stalin wasn't ready to face coalition between Germany and Great Britain and France and USA and Japan. What they talking about here? But today we were not only ready for the trade war, economic and financial war, we already achieved our first victory. European Union lost the natural gas war to Russia already. So anyone in Russia who doesn't approve what Russia went through since 2000 must understand that we didn't waste time, and behind the media wars against corruption, Berezovsky, Khodorkovsky, and such people, we were getting ready for war. So this is quite an interesting statement. It's pretty much tells you that since 2000, everything what Russia was doing was getting ready for war. It's pretty crazy. So for 22 years, there was preparation, pretty much since the day Putin became the president of Russia. He started getting ready for a big war against Anglo-Saxon coalition. And meanwhile, Dudayev, who was the leader of the independent Chechnya, back in 1995, he predicted that Russia will fight the war against Ukraine. Back in 2014, we weren't ready yet to deflect financial and trade sanctions of the United States and European Union, and this is why Russia didn't move further than creating Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, so that's back in 2014. But today, we are ready. In fact, today, the Putin's Russia, so that's interesting, that's how they call it, Россия Putina, Putin's Russia, managed to achieve what Stalin wasn't able to do back in 1941. It not only prevented an aggression by the neo-Nazi icebreaker 2.0 by attacking the beast in its lair first and not letting the enemy troops on Russian soil, but what's the most important, Russia did not allow, after the beginning of the special military operation, to be pushed into trade and economic insulation and to damage the economic foundation of Russia. So here's another crazy statement that Ukraine was actually planning to attack Russia, which is nuts, and that by attacking the beast in its lair, which, yeah, they tried to occupy Kiev, but then they got their butts kicked and they pulled back. But it's pretty much the whole statement that Russia was forced to attack Ukraine to prevent Ukraine attacking Russia. All these facts show us what a monumental work was performed by the Russian government in the recent years. They also show that society failed to understand the sheer volume of work done. Even the experts failed to comprehend it. So it's interesting, like, hey, Russian government did a great job, just you all don't understand what happened and why it was done, why we all suffered, why roads were bad and bridges failing all over Russia, because it was more important stuff to do. Comparison with 1930s and 40s should give everyone understanding what was achieved since 2000 and appreciate the fact it was done without mass repressions, продразверстка, which food confiscations, which Stalin did to Ukrainian peasants and peasants of other areas, and military communism, without other negative events and actions that happened during the Soviet period of 1930s and 40s. It must be appreciated, comrades. Like, we did all that without arresting and sending to Siberia thousands of people, so you should be thankful. It must be appreciated, comrades, because Putin got ready for war without activating the Gulag mode. That's just crazy. Well, anyways, I hope you enjoyed this story, this video. As always, please post your comments, like this video, and we'll talk to you soon. До свидания. Goodbye.
Потому что если дороги будут, то по ним неприятель проедет и прямо в сердце России попадет.
Я с ними согласен абсолютно.